So this is the rear shock tower from out of the car now. What I'm going to do is compress this spring and remove the shock absorber and put back the stock springs, which is what I wanted to do. Anyway, so what this involves is putting these spring compressors on, tightening them, and then there is this one bolt to remove, and then the assembly comes out. Okay, the spring compressors are on, and these are cheap spring compressors that I bought for $20 at Harbor Freight. They not sophisticated by any means, but they seem to do the job. So these are these protective hooks that you're supposed to put on. See how they're put on here. And what I've done is make these as diametrically opposite as possible. Turns out it's easier to slide in the single hook first before you put in the double hook. But you know, your mileage may vary. You'll have to futz around a bit before you figure out the best place to put them. So, and now we tighten them. So I've tightened the spring compressors, and now you can see that this is loose, and the spring is loose in its seat. And now if we remove this bolt here, the thing will pull out. The shock will pull out. I'm ready to loosen this bolt here with my breaker bar. What I'm going to do is put the socket, which is let's see here, 19mm socket, and I'm going to put my foot here and haul on it. I guess turn off the camera and haul on it. So that bolt's off, that nut's off. I had to, that's tightened to a fairly high torque, so it takes a bit of work to get it off. But you know, with a long enough cheater extension bar, breaker bar, it's not that difficult. The only trick is now this also has to be unscrewed rather than just tapped out, and this is quite easy. Just do this and it will come out. So getting this the strut out is a bit of a pain. So there's a hole that lines up here, and you just have to rock this guy. And now what I did was I put a screwdriver in this hole and coaxed the thing out a little bit while rocking it, and then finally it comes out. So it looks impossible, but it does come out if you stick to it. So there's the strut tower out of the housing, and now what I have to do is compress this spring again a little bit, take it out, and put the stock spring back in again. Okay, now I'm ready to reinstall the shock spring, the old stock spring, which is what I wanted to do. So a couple of things to note here. The bigger end goes on the housing, and the smaller end of the springs mounts on this little the flange thing here on the shock itself. So it's not symmetric. So in order to put the clamps, the spring compressors back on again, what I do is I mount the housing in a bench vise, and then put this guy. Oh, the other thing to note before we do that is that this end, now when we put it back in there, if you look inside, now it may or may not be very visible, but there are two holes for this, of course, as we saw, but the holes have guides in them, which will guide the matching holes on the shock. So the idea is you put the shock in and then tap it in gently, and it should line up just fine. So if we observe the seat here, the spring, there's a helical channel on the rubber seat here which matches the spring itself, the big end of the spring. Similarly, there's a similar matching thing on matching helix on this aluminum piece here. So we have to put the clamps in such that those things are at the appropriately positioned, and we have to put the clamp such that the bolts of the clamp don't push up against these things. So what I do is I clamp this housing in the vise, and now I'm going to position the clamps suitably, or the spring compressors. Okay, here's the position of the spring compressors. Note that I've taken care to make sure that this thing will clear the flange here on the housing, and tried to keep them about as diametrically opposite as I could make them. So now I've managed to line up the holes again. What I did was I compressed the spring and then pushed this in and then tapped it gently with a rubber mallet, and that thing slides into place because it has guides in there. You do have to make sure that the holes are kind of approximately lined up, so when they go in like this, and there's this sort of V-shaped guide in there which guides it into place. So you can see it's there, and then I have to just put the bolt in. So one last thing, as you loosen the springs, you got to make sure that this stays seated in this position, and this bottom one as well. See how the end of the spring butts up against this top. So that's what you need to do, because right now it can actually move around. So as you uncompress the spring will push up against it, and then you won't be able to move it. So you need to make sure they're in position before you loosen the spring compressors.